The rain drummed against the tall windows of La Bernardine as Sophia Bennett balanced 3 plates on her left arm while reaching for the wine bottle with her right. Her black uniform was spotless despite the chaos of the Friday night rush, and her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun that had somehow survived 8 hours of non-stop service. She moved between tables with practiced grace, offering smiles to customers who barely looked at her face. Most saw only the uniform, the invisible servant bringing their expensive meals. Sophia had grown used to being background noise in other people's stories. The mysterious stranger at table 12 sat a man who had been nursing the same glass of wine for over an hour. Unlike the other patrons who chatted loudly about stock prices and vacation homes, this one sat in complete silence. His dark suit was perfectly tailored, and his watch caught the light every time he lifted his glass. But it was his eyes that made Sophia pause during her rounds. They held the weight of someone carrying secrets. Jonathan Rivers had chosen this restaurant specifically because it was the kind of place where wealthy people came to be seen, not to hide. The irony was not lost on him that he was doing exactly the opposite. His phone buzzed for the 15th time in 10 minutes, each message more urgent than the last. The board meeting tomorrow would determine whether he kept control of his company or lost everything to a hostile takeover. The unwanted attention, Mr. Rivers. There you are. Jonathan's stomach dropped as he recognized the voice. Vincent Morrison. His biggest rival approached the table with a predatory smile. Behind him walked 2 other board members who had clearly been looking for him all evening. Gentlemen, Jonathan said, not bothering to stand. I thought we agreed to keep business. Discussions in the boardroom? Oh, but this is so much more civilized, Vincent said, pulling out a chair without invitation. We simply wanted to discuss tomorrow's vote in a more relaxed setting. Jonathan's jaw tightened. These men had spent months maneuvering to remove him from his own company, and now they wanted to gloat before their victory was complete. He glanced around the restaurant, looking for an escape route. When his eyes landed on the waitress refilling water glasses 2 tables away, the desperate plan without overthinking it, Jonathan stood and walked directly to Sophia. She looked up in surprise as he approached, noting the tension in his shoulders and the way his hands clenched at his sides. I need your help, he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the restaurant's ambient noise. Those men at my table are making me extremely uncomfortable, and I need them to think I'm here with someone. Sophia glanced over at table 12, where 3 men in expensive suits were watching their interaction with obvious interest. Something in their predatory expressions made her skin crawl. What exactly are you asking me to do? She whispered. Back, still holding the water pitcher. Pretend I'm your boyfriend, Jonathan said, the words tumbling out faster than he intended. Just for a few minutes until they leave. I'll make it worth your while. The split-second decision Sophia studied. His face. There was something genuine in his desperation, something that reminded her of how she felt when landlords came demanding rent she didn't have. The look of someone who had run out of options. Please, he added, and the single word carried more vulnerability than she expected from a man in a $1,000 suit. She set down the water pitcher and smoothed her apron. What's my name supposed to be? Relief flooded his features. Just be yourself, and thank you. Sophia walked back to table 12 with Jonathan beside her, her heart racing as she tried to figure out how exactly one pretended to be dating a complete stranger. The 3 men looked up expectantly as they approached. Gentlemen, Jonathan said, his entire demeanor transformed. I'd like you to meet Sophia, my girlfriend. The performance begins. Vincent's eyes narrowed as he took in Sophia's uniform, and her obvious nervousness. How lovely, he said with barely concealed skepticism. And where did you 2 meet? Sophia felt Jonathan's hand settle gently on her lower back, a touch that was somehow both protective and encouraging. She found herself standing straighter. At an art gallery, she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Jonathan was admiring a piece that I happen to know quite a bit about. It wasn't entirely a lie. She did spend her free time at galleries, even if she couldn't afford to buy anything. How romantic, Vincent said dryly. And what do you do, my dear? Condescension in his voice made something spark in Sophia's chest. She had dealt with men like this before, wealthy customers who treated service workers like decoration. "I'm an artist," she said firmly. "Waitressing is just temporary while I build my portfolio." Jonathan squeezed her hand, and she realized she was holding it without remembering when that happened. "Unexpected chemistry? We really should be going," Jonathan said, pulling out his wallet. "Sophia and I have dinner reservations at another place." "Of course you do," Vincent said, but his smile had become uncertain. Whatever game he had been planning to play was clearly not going according to script. As Jonathan left money on the table, it's far more than necessary for one glass of wine, Sophia found herself playing the part more naturally than she had expected. She leaned slightly into his side as they prepared to leave, and was surprised by how solid and warm he felt. "It was lovely meeting you all," she said sweetly to the three men, then looked up at Jonathan with what she hoped looked like affection. "Ready to go, sweetheart? It's the moment of truth." They walked toward the restaurant's exit together, and Sophia could feel the eyes of the three men following them. It wasn't until they were outside in the cool night air that she realized she was still holding Jonathan's hand. "I'm sorry," she said, starting to pull away, but he held on gently. "Don't apologize. You were perfect." He turned to face her, and in the glow of the streetlights, she could see something had changed in his expression. "I mean it. You saved me back there." Sophia felt heat rise in her cheeks. "It was nothing. Anyone would have helped." "No," Jonathan said quietly, "they wouldn't have. Most people would have walked away, and I wouldn't have blamed them." They stood there for a moment, two strangers who had just shared something unexpectedly intimate. The rain had stopped, leaving the sidewalks gleaming under the lights. The city moved around them, but in that bubble of space between the restaurant door and the street, time seemed suspended. The unexpected invitation, "I know this is going to sound crazy," Jonathan said, running his free hand through his hair, "but those men are going to be watching me for the next few days. If they think I was lying about having a girlfriend, they'll use it against me somehow." Sophia tilted her head, not understanding. "Would you consider extending this arrangement?" "For just a little while longer?" he asked. "I know it's a lot to ask, and I know you don't know me, but I'm in a situation where I can't trust anyone in my usual circle." The smart thing would be to say no. Sophia knew that. She had learned long ago that wealthy men who made desperate requests usually brought complications she couldn't afford. But there was something about the way he looked at her, as if she were the most important person in the world, instead of just a waitress who had happened to be in the right place at the right time. What exactly would this arrangement involve? She heard herself asking the terms of agreement, a few public appearances, maybe dinner tomorrow night, definitely a charity event next weekend. "Nothing inappropriate, I promise. You'd have your own space, your own time. I'd compensate you for your trouble, of course." Sophia thought about her overdue rent, her empty refrigerator, the art supplies she couldn't afford. Then she thought about Vincent Morrison's condescending smile and how good it had felt to wipe it off his face. "How much trouble are we talking about?" she asked. Jonathan smiled, and for the first time that evening, it reached his eyes. "Hopefully not too much. But I should probably warn you that my life is a bit more complicated than most people's." "More complicated than working double shifts while trying to make it as an artist in the most expensive city in the world?" she asked with a raised eyebrow. "Fair point." He pulled out his phone. "Can I get your number? I promise I'm not a complete stranger forever. I'll tell you everything you want to know." As Sophia recited her number and watched him enter it into his phone, she wondered what exactly she was getting herself into. But for the first time in months, she felt like she was stepping into a story instead of just watching other people live theirs. The first step into a new world. "I'll call you tomorrow," Jonathan said, as a black car pulled up to the curb. "And Sophia, thank you, really." She watched the car disappear into traffic, then looked down at her hands. She could still feel the warmth of his palm against hers, still smell his cologne mixed with the rain-washed air. Walking back into the restaurant. To finish her shift, Sophia caught her reflection in the glass door. Something in her expression had changed. She looked like a woman who had just agreed to something that might transform her life entirely. The question was whether that transformation would be wonderful or catastrophic. As she tied her apron back on and returned to her tables, Sophia found herself hoping for wonderful, even though experience had taught her to expect catastrophic. But maybe, just this once, the universe had something different in store for her. Sophia stared at her phone screen, reading the text message for the 5th time since waking up. The number was unfamiliar, but the message was crystal clear. "Good morning, Sophia. This is Jonathan. Are you free for coffee this afternoon? We should discuss our arrangement properly." She set the phone down on her tiny kitchen counter and rubbed her eyes. In the harsh light of morning, last night felt like a dream. Had she really agreed to pretend to be some wealthy stranger's girlfriend? The rational part of her mind screamed that this was exactly how people got themselves into dangerous situations. But then she looked around her cramped studio apartment. The stack of overdue bills on her desk, the empty refrigerator humming sadly in the corner, the easel in the corner holding a half-finished painting she couldn't afford to complete because she'd run out of paint. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was her landlord. "The harsh reality rent was due 3 days ago, Sophia. I need payment by end of business today, or we'll need to discuss other arrangements." Sophia's stomach dropped. She had exactly $47 in her checking account and wouldn't get paid from the restaurant for another week. Even then, it wouldn't be enough to cover both rent and food. She picked up her phone and typed back to Jonathan. "Coffee sounds good. Where and when?" His response came within minutes. "Caf Luna on 5th Street, 2 p.m. And Sophia, bring an overnight bag. We might need to make this look more convincing than I initially thought." The Caf meeting Caf Luna was the kind of place Sophia had walked past 100 times, but never entered. The coffee cost more than she made in an hour, and the clientele looked like they shopped exclusively in stores that didn't list prices on their items. Jonathan was already seated at a corner table when she arrived, and she almost didn't recognize him. Gone was the desperate man from the restaurant. This version wore dark jeans and a simple white shirt, his hair slightly tousled as if he'd been running his hands through it. He looked younger, more approachable, but there was still something in his eyes that suggested he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. "You came," he said, standing as she approached. There was genuine relief in his voice. "I keep my word," Sophia replied, setting down her small duffel bag and sliding into the chair across from him, "though I have to admit I'm still not entirely sure what I've gotten myself into." Jonathan signaled the waitress and ordered 2 cappuccinos without asking what Sophia wanted. The presumption should have annoyed her, but somehow it felt considerate rather than controlling. "The full truth, I owe you an explanation," Jonathan said once they were alone. A real one this time. Sophia leaned back in her chair, studying his face. That would be nice. Starting with why 3 men in expensive suits were making you uncomfortable enough to ask a complete stranger for help. Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the table. "My name is Jonathan Rivers. I'm the CEO of Rivers Technology. Have you heard of it?" Sophia's eyes widened slightly. Even she, who paid almost no attention to business news, had heard of Rivers Technology. They made the software that ran half the apps on her phone. "Those men last night want to buy my company," Jonathan continued. "More specifically, they want to force me out and take it over. They've been systematically undermining me for months, trying to prove I'm unstable, unreliable, not fit to run the business I built from nothing. Having a girlfriend proves you're stable." Jonathan's mouth twisted into a humorless smile. "In their world, yes. A man with a serious relationship is grounded, responsible, thinking about the future instead of just quarterly profits. It's archaic and ridiculous, but it's how they think." The waitress brought their coffee, and Sophia wrapped her hands around the warm cup, processing this information. "The complication, there's something else," Jonathan said, his voice dropping lower. "Vincent Morrison, the man who was leading that group last night, he's not just after my company. This is personal for him. 5 years ago, I was engaged to his daughter, Catherine." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "She died in a car accident 2 weeks before our wedding. Vincent blamed me because I was supposed to pick her up that night, but I got caught up in a business emergency. She drove herself and hit black ice on the highway. Sophia felt her chest tighten. I'm sorry. That's terrible. Vincent never forgave me. In his mind, if I had been a better fiancé, if I had put Catherine first instead of work, she'd still be alive. He's probably right. Pain in Jonathan's voice was raw, unguarded. Sophia found herself leaning forward, her earlier skepticism melting away. You can't know that, she said softly. Accidents happen. You can't control everything. Can't. Jonathan looked up at her and she saw years of guilt and regret in his eyes. I've spent the last 5 years trying to control everything, building walls around myself, keeping people at a distance so I never have to choose between business and personal again. And now Vincent wants to destroy everything I built as his version of justice, the deeper request. So where do I fit into all this? Sophia asked, though she was beginning to understand. I need Vincent to see that I've changed, that I'm capable of putting someone else first. He believes I'm in a real relationship, that I've learned to balance work and personal life. He might back down from the hostile takeover. Sophia sipped her cappuccino, buying time to think. And if he doesn't, then at least I'll have tried everything. Jonathan reached across the table and touched her hand lightly. I know this is asking a lot. It's asking you to step into a world you don't. No. Deal with people who can be ruthless, pretend to feel things you don't feel. What makes you think I don't feel anything? The question slipped out before Sophia could stop herself. Jonathan's eyes snapped to hers, searching her face. Do you? The unexpected chemistry, the space between them seemed to shrink. Sophia was acutely aware of his fingers still resting on her hand, warm and surprisingly calloused for a man who worked behind a desk. I don't know, she said honestly, but there was something about last night, the way you looked at me like I mattered. Most people look through me. You do matter, Jonathan said, his voice intense. More than you know. Flush of heat spread through Sophia's chest. This was dangerous territory, and she knew it. Getting emotionally involved with a client is the fastest way to get hurt. But when had anyone ever looked at her the way Jonathan was looking at her now, as if she were the most fascinating person in the room? The new arrangement, if I agree to this, Sophia said, pulling her hand back and trying to regain some emotional distance. I need to know exactly what I'm agreeing to. Jonathan nodded and pulled out his phone, opening his calendar. There's a board dinner tomorrow night. Everyone brings their spouses or significant others. You'd need to come with me and convince a room full of very smart, very suspicious people that we're genuinely together. And after that, a charity gala this weekend? It's the kind of event where business deals get made over champagne and small talk. Vincent will be there, along with most of the board. Sophia thought about her empty apartment, her overdue bills, her paintings that no one would ever see because she couldn't afford to frame them properly, let alone display them anywhere. What's the compensation for all this? Jonathan named a figure that made Sophia's coffee cup rattle against its saucer as she set it down too quickly. That's more than I make in 6 months, she said. It's what you're worth, Jonathan replied. Simply, and if this works, if we can convince Vincent to back down, there'll be a bonus. The living situation you mentioned, an overnight bag, Sophia said, trying to process everything, will need to be seen together outside of formal events. Casual dinners, morning coffee runs, the kind of things couples do. It would be easier if you stayed at my place for a few days. Sophia's eyebrows shot up. Your place? I have a guest room, Jonathan said quickly. And this doesn't have to be more complicated than we make it. But if Vincent has people watching me, and he probably does, they need to see evidence that we're actually together. The smart thing would be to say no. Sophia knew that. This whole situation was spinning beyond her control, becoming more elaborate and risky by the minute. But then she thought about her landlord's text message. It's about the stack of bills on her. Counter about the way Jonathan had looked at her last night, as if she had just saved his life. Okay, she said. But I have conditions. Setting boundaries, Jonathan leaned forward. All business now. Name them. First, I need to be able to leave. Whenever I want. No matter what's happening with your business drama, if I decide this isn't working for me, I walk away. Agreed. Second, no one can know this is fake. It's not your friends, not your employees, no one. If we're doing this, We commit to the performance completely, of course. Third, Sophia took a deep breath. If at any point this starts to feel real for either of us, we address it head on. No pretending it's not happening, no letting things get messy and complicated. Jonathan was quiet for a moment, studying her face. That's a very mature way to approach this. I've been hurt before, Sophia said simply. I know how these things can go wrong. As if summoned by their conversation, a woman approached their table. She was tall and elegant, with silver hair pulled back in a perfect chignon and eyes that missed nothing. Jonathan Rivers, she said warmly, extending her hand. I thought, that was you? Victoria Sterling. We met at the Peterson Foundation event last month. Jonathan stood immediately, his entire posture changing as he shifted into professional mode. Victoria, of course. How lovely to see you again. Victoria's eyes moved to Sophia with obvious curiosity. And who is this? This was it, Sophia realized. The first real test of their arrangement. Jonathan's hand settled on her shoulder as she stood. She was surprised by how natural the gesture felt. Victoria, I'd like you to meet my girlfriend, Sophia Bennett. Sophia Victoria is one of the city's most successful art dealers. Art dealer. Sophia's interest was immediately genuine. What kind of work do you represent? Victoria's smile became more authentic as she launched into a description of her gallery. And Sophia found herself drawn into a real conversation about contemporary artists and emerging trends. She forgot to be nervous, forgot to monitor her responses for authenticity. When Victoria finally excused herself, she pressed her business card into Sophia's hand. I'd love to see your work sometime, she said. Any girlfriend of Jonathan's is someone I want to know better. The realization as Victoria walked away, Sophia looked down at the business card in amazement. Sterling Gallery was one of the most prestigious in the city. She wants to see my paintings, Sophia said, almost to herself. Of course she does, Jonathan said. You were brilliant, natural, passionate, completely authentic. Sophia looked up at him and something shifted in the air between them. I wasn't acting just then. I know, Jonathan said softly. Neither was I when I introduced you as my girlfriend. They stood there in the cafe, surrounded by the chatter of other customers and the hiss of the espresso machine, and Sophia felt the ground beneath her feet shift slightly. This arrangement was supposed to be simple, transactional, temporary, but the way Jonathan was looking at her now suggested it might become something else entirely. The point of no return we should go. Jonathan said finally, I want to show you the apartment before tonight. Sophia shouldered her duffel bag and followed him out of the cafe, her mind racing. She had just crossed a line, and she wasn't entirely sure which side of it she was on now, as they walked down the busy street together. Jonathan's hand found hers naturally, and Sophia didn't pull away. To anyone watching, they looked exactly like what they were pretending to be, a couple in love, comfortable with each other, building something real together. The terrifying part was how right it felt. The grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Hotel sparkled under crystal chandeliers, filled with the city's elite dressed in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. Sophia adjusted the strap of her borrowed evening dress, a midnight blue creation that Jonathan had somehow procured for her in less than 24 hours. She still didn't understand how he managed things like that. You look stunning, Jonathan, whispered as they approached the entrance, his hand warm against her lower back. Remember, we've been together for 6 months. We met at the Morrison Gallery opening, bonded over a contemporary sculpture. Sophia nodded, though her stomach was churning. 3 days of living in Jonathan's penthouse had blurred the lines between pretense and reality in ways that terrified her. Morning coffee together had become comfortable. Evening conversations about art and business had grown genuine. The way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching had shifted from grateful to something deeper. The performance Vincent Morrison stood near the bar, his silver hair gleaming under the lights as he held court with several board members. His eyes found Jonathan immediately, tracking their movement across the room with predatory interest. Showtime, Sophia murmured. Sliding her hand into Jonathan's arm, they moved through the crowd like a real couple, stopping to chat with other guests, laughing at each other's jokes, sharing the kind of comfortable intimacy that couldn't be faked. At least Sophia hoped it couldn't be faked, because what she was feeling had stopped being an act somewhere between the coffee shop and now. Thomas Chen, the gallery owner who had mentored Sophia through her early struggles as an artist, appeared. Beside them, with a champagne flute in hand, "Sophia Bennett," he said warmly, kissing her cheek. "Hardly recognized you all dressed up. You look radiant." "Thomas," Sophia smiled genuinely for the first time that evening. "I didn't expect to see you here." "The Chen Foundation is one of tonight's sponsors," Thomas explained, then turned to Jonathan with curious eyes. "And you must be the mysterious boyfriend I've been hearing whispers about." The mentor's suspicion, Jonathan extended his hand with practiced charm. "Jonathan Rivers, it's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Chen." "Ah, Rivers Technology," Thomas nodded knowingly. "I've read about your recent board troubles in the financial papers." Sophia felt Jonathan's arm tense under her hand, but his smile never wavered. "Business challenges come with the territory. Fortunately, I have Sophia to help me keep perspective on what really matters." Thomas studied them both with the sharp eyes of someone who had spent decades reading people's true intentions. As an art dealer and mentor, he had developed an instinct for authenticity that rarely failed him. "How did you two meet?" Thomas asked casually. Though Sophia recognized the probing tone he used when evaluating new artists' work. At a gallery opening, Sophia said, reciting their prepared story. "Jonathan was studying a piece by Marcus Webb, and we started talking about contemporary sculpture." "Interesting," Thomas mused. "Which piece specifically?" Sophia's mind went blank. They had rehearsed general details, but not specifics. Jonathan squeezed her arm gently, a subtle signal of support. "The bronze installation near the back wall," Jonathan said smoothly. "The one about urban isolation and human connection?" Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Marcus Webb works exclusively in mixed media installations. He's never done bronze work." The first crack, an uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Sophia felt heat rise in her cheeks as Thomas continued to study their faces. "Perhaps you're thinking of a different artist?" Thomas suggested diplomatically, but his expression had shifted from curious to concerned. "Of course," Jonathan said quickly. "These gallery openings all blur together after a while." "Yes," Thomas said slowly. "I imagine they do." Across the room, Vincent Morrison was watching their interaction with obvious interest. He had positioned himself within earshot, and Sophia could see the satisfaction in his eyes as he observed their awkward exchange. The confrontation, after. Thomas excused himself with a meaningful look at Sophia. Vincent approached with two other board members in tow. "Jonathan, what a lovely evening," Vincent said with false warmth. "And Sophia, you look absolutely stunning. That dress is exquisite." "Thank you," Sophia replied, forcing a smile while internally screaming at herself for the Marcus Webb mistake. "Was just telling Charles and Robert here about your relationship," Vincent continued smoothly. 6 months together, isn't it? Though I have to say, I'm surprised we haven't met before tonight. Jonathan usually introduces his significant others to the business community much sooner. Jonathan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Sophia values her privacy. I respect that. How refreshing, Vincent smiled coldly. A woman who doesn't. Want to be seen with one of the city's most eligible bachelors? How did you manage to find such a rare creature, Jonathan? The insult was subtle, but unmistakable. Sophia felt anger flare in her chest, the same protective instinct that had made her defend herself against condescending customers at the restaurant. Find that truly successful people don't need to parade their relationships for public approval, she said smoothly. We prefer substance over spectacle. Vincent's eyes glittered with malicious amusement. Well said. And what is it you do, my dear, besides dating tech moguls? I'm an artist, Sophia replied, lifting her chin defiantly. How wonderful. What medium do you work in? Mixed media installations, primarily? The lie came, easily influenced by her earlier mistake with Thomas. Like Marcus Webb, Vincent said with mock interest. I believe he's showing at the Morrison Gallery next month. Perhaps you know him personally. The trap spring Sophia's blood ran cold. The Morrison Gallery? Vincent's family gallery. He had deliberately led her into this trap, using her earlier mistake against them. Actually, Vincent continued before she could respond, I own the Morrison Gallery. It's funny. I don't recall any female mixed media artists on our roster for the next year. Perhaps you show somewhere else? The silence stretched painfully. Around them, other conversations continued, but Sophia felt as if everyone in the ballroom was watching their exchange. Sophia's work is held privately, Jonathan said tersely. Not everyone needs public validation. Of course not, Vincent agreed, with false sincerity, though I do find it curious that in 6 months of dating, you've never mentioned your girlfriend's artistic pursuits to any of us. One would think a proud boyfriend would want to share such information. The moment of truth. Thomas. Chen reappeared at Sophia's elbow, as if summoned by her distress. His timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Sophia, could I speak with you privately? He said gently. There's someone I'd like you to meet. It was clearly a rescue attempt, but Vincent wasn't finished playing his game. Actually, I was hoping to hear more about Sophia's artistic background. Vincent said, as a gallery owner, I'm always interested in discovering new talent. Thomas looked between Vincent and Sophia, his expression growing more concerned by the moment. Perhaps this conversation would be better suited for another time, Thomas suggested diplomatically. Nonsense, Vincent pressed. I'm fascinated by the intersection of technology and art. Surely Jonathan's girlfriend has some insights into how her boyfriend's innovations might influence contemporary artistic expression. The question was clearly designed to expose their lack of genuine intimacy. Any real girlfriend would know about Jonathan's work beyond the basic public information. The breaking point. Sophia looked at Jonathan, seeing the desperation in his eyes, the way his carefully constructed facade was beginning to crumble. She thought about the past 3 days, about the way he had listened to her talk about her dreams over morning coffee, about the gentleness in his touch when he thought she was sleeping. She thought about Vincent's cruel smile, about the way he had systematically destroyed Jonathan's credibility, using grief and guilt as weapons. And she made a choice. You want to know the truth? Sophia said quietly, her voice cutting through the ambient noise of the gala. The real truth about Jonathan? And me? Jonathan's eyes widened in panic, but Sophia continued before he could stop her. We're not really together. This whole thing is a performance, designed to make you believe Jonathan has learned to balance work and personal life. The confession. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Vincent's smile widened triumphantly, while Jonathan stood frozen beside her. But here's what you don't understand, Sophia continued, her voice growing stronger. In the past 3 days, I've learned more about who Jonathan really is than you've bothered to discover in 5 years of trying to destroy him. She turned to face Vincent directly, no longer caring about the consequences. He carries a picture of your daughter in his wallet, not because he's guilty, but because he loved her. He blames himself for her death every single day, not because he's selfish, but because he cared so deeply that losing her nearly destroyed him. Vincent's face had gone pale, his triumphant expression faltering. He built this company not for money or power, but to create something meaningful, something that would have made Catherine proud. And you've spent 5 years trying to tear down. The only thing he has left of the future, they planned together. The truth about love. Sophia turned to Jonathan, tears streaming down her face as she spoke the words she hadn't planned to say. You hired me to pretend to love you, but the joke's on both of us, because I don't have to pretend anymore. I do love you. I love the way you make coffee for 2 people every morning, even though you used to live alone. I love that you remember every detail about my paintings, even though you're drowning in business crisis. I love that you're so terrified of losing someone again that you push everyone away, but you let me stay. The ballroom had gone quiet around them, other guests sensing the drama unfolding, but not understanding its significance. Jonathan reached for her hand. His eyes filled with something that looked like wonder. Sophia, he whispered. I love you, she repeated, no longer caring who heard. Not the performance version, not the fake boyfriend, but you. The real you, with all your guilt and fear and impossible standards for yourself. Vincent's revelation. Vincent Morrison stood motionless, his face cycling through emotions as he processed Sophia's words. Finally he spoke, his voice hoarse. She carried a picture of you too, he said quietly, in her purse. The police gave me. her personal effects after the accident. Jonathan went very still. Catherine never blamed you for working late, Vincent continued, his earlier hostility cracking. She used to tell me how proud she was of your dedication, how she knew you were going to change the world. She said that was one of the reasons she loved you. Tears were streaming down Vincent's face now, years of misdirected grief finally finding their proper target. I blamed you because it was easier than accepting that sometimes terrible things just happen. Sometimes there's no one to punish, no way to make sense of loss. The resolution, the three of them stood in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by curious onlookers, but entirely focused on each other. Years of pain and misunderstanding were unraveling in real time. I'm sorry, Vincent said, his voice breaking. I'm sorry for trying to destroy what Catherine would have wanted you to build. I'm sorry for using my grief as a weapon against you. Jonathan nodded, unable to speak past the emotion in his throat. Thomas Chen approached quietly, placing a gentle hand on Sophia's shoulder. That was either the most authentic thing I've ever witnessed, or the most brilliant performance, he said softly. Both, Sophia admitted, wiping tears from her cheeks. It started as performance, but it became real. Somewhere along the way, the new beginning later that evening, back in Jonathan's penthouse. They sat together on the balcony overlooking the city lights. The formal clothes had been replaced with comfortable pajamas and borrowed sweatshirts. So what happens now, Sophia? Asked, her head resting against Jonathan's shoulder. Now we figure out how to do this for real, Jonathan said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. No more pretending, no more performance. Just us. That sounds terrifying, Sophia admitted. Terrifying? Jonathan agreed. But also worth it. Below them, the city sparkled with millions of lights, each one representing a life, a story, a possibility. Somewhere in those lights were other people taking chances on love, making leaps of faith, choosing hope over fear. The epilogue 6 months. Later, Sophia's first solo art exhibition opened at the Sterling Gallery. The mixed media installations she had learned to create during her relationship with Jonathan explored themes of authentic connection and the masks people wear to protect themselves. Jonathan stood beside her as guests moved through the gallery, discussing her work with the kind of serious attention she had always dreamed of receiving. Vincent Morrison was there too. Having become an unexpected champion of both Sophia's art and Jonathan's business vision, Thomas Chen approached them as the evening wound down, a knowing smile on his face. So, he said to Sophia, mixed media installations, when did you start working in that medium? Sophia blushed, remembering that disastrous conversation at the gala. About 6 months ago, she admitted. Right around the time I learned that sometimes the best art comes from the most unexpected places. Jonathan squeezed her hand, and Sophia squeezed back. Their story had begun with deception, but it had grown into something real, something worth the risk of heartbreak, as they walked home through the city streets, hand in hand. Sophia reflected on how much had changed since that night in the restaurant, when a desperate stranger had asked her to pretend to be his girlfriend. She had learned that love wasn't something you could fake, but it was something you could choose. Every day, in small moments and grand gestures. You could choose to stay, to trust, to believe that this time might be different. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, that choice led to something beautiful. Something beautiful. Something beautiful. Something beautiful.